Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 2021 Integration Down Under. And just to remind everybody of the organizers for Integration Down Under, it's Martin from Perth, Dan from Brisbane, Renee from Sydney, Wagner from Auckland, and myself here in Melbourne, who this last week or the week before set the world record for the most lockdown, and we're still there. Okay, so tonight's talk is going to be Martin and myself with EDI with Azure Logic Apps. I know Martin's been working on a project with one of his clients. I just finished a pretty big EDI project with Logic Apps, helping a customer move away from a value-added network and going to Logic Apps, and they've got AS2 and Edifact. I think Martin's done a little bit of work with the X12 stuff. So far, I haven't had to do anything with X12. It's just been the Edifact and the AS2. And the demo I've got prepared to go along with Martin's talk is showing you how to set up two different partners, and I'm using two different Azure subscriptions so that we can bounce back and forth between those and see all of the interactions. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to pass over to Martin and let him start. There we go.
And I did quickly update the title that I had on that title slide just because I realized it was wrong. Let's move on. Right, so thanks, Bill. So as Bill said, my name is Martin Abbott. I'm one of the organizers generally. I currently actually work for Microsoft as a technical specialist for, Azure applications essentially, but obviously with a specialization around integration. As Bill said, I had a customer that I was working for, and we were trying to move them off of somewhat older tech onto Logic Apps, and that gave me some opportunity to see where we were going with the technology. I know that everybody wants to really see Bill's demos, so I won't hold people up too long. But I thought just we'd have a bit of a level set as to, because I'm aware that there's a lot of integration people out there who've probably heard of EDI but don't really know what it is. So my job is to educate you in that before I chuck things over to Bill and we get to the really, really interesting stuff. So without further ado, let me just see if this slide advances. It does, fantastic, it's all working. Right, so what is EDI? It stands for Electronic Data Interchange. So I guess I've tried to liken this to the way that you used to work with old computers and punch cards, I guess. Those punch cards would be interpreted in a very specific way in those old computers. I don't actually remember those old computers. I'm thankfully young enough to not remember them, although only just, to be fair. But it's an ability to exchange data and information in a meaningful way that's in a format that is understood by both parties. So think about that from an XML schema perspective. Think about that from JSON schemas. But in this particular case, it's flat files with positional data. So, and we'll go into more as to what that means and what that looks like in a little while.
And one way I always describe it, Martin, is that EDI came about when a 1200 baud modem was high speed.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Small pieces of data, quite often at relatively high volume, but definitely small pieces of data that are exchanged in a way that is, let's say, efficient, shall we? So I've mentioned there it's used extensively in supply chain, retail, communications, and the financial sector. In my particular case, for the project that I was working on, that was a supply chain organization who had, many partner organizations that they were working with. But how does it really work? Well, that's kind of like a very basic flow of the sort of way that it works. At either end, you'll have some data in some internal format. Maybe that's in the ERP. Maybe that's in some other system, like a mainframe. Maybe that's in some warehouse management system. That data will be extracted out, usually in some kind of random format that is meaningful to that organization. Maybe that's XML. Maybe nowadays that might be JSON. Maybe it's a flat file. That is then translated using a piece of software, which is typically what's seen there as an EDI translator. That creates the document, and then the document is sent. And then the opposite happens on the other side, because obviously the piece of data which may come out of partner one's warehouse management system has to go to partner two's warehouse management system in a format that is meaningful to that particular partner. So these are kind of the traditional ways of doing comms between partners. So just and Bill will talk more about partners when we talk about when we talk in the demo. But essentially, in this particular case, a partner or partners are two organizations that need to communicate using EDI, sending data in a specific format. So think of them as those. So think of them typically as two businesses that need to exchange information. Those can happen typically via point-to-point connections. That's great, but you obviously can imagine that gets pretty spaghetti pretty soon. Value-added network, which I'm going to get to, and we're going to talk about these in a bit more detail as we go, and AS2 is the other one, and I think that's probably where we're going to see a lot of stuff around the demos. So point-to-point, you can imagine that in this particular case, if you're the organization that's sending information out, that's probably not too bad, but if you're the organization or the partner that's receiving the information, you have to be able to receive things in a multitude of different ways. And very quickly, you can imagine that this becomes very, very spaghettified. And I just made that word up, by the way, spaghettified. You can use all that, that's fine. I try and make a word up in every presentation if I possibly can. But you can imagine that this becomes pretty cumbersome for that organization that's down the bottom there, who have to manage the way that they communicate with each of these partners in very different ways. So how do you get around that? So there's an image of what you might see as that spaghetti where you've got partners communicating in very specific ways. The way you get around that was with a value-added network. And these have been around for very, very, very many years. So value-added network service providers, so think of them almost like an ISP, I suppose. So what they do is they provide essentially the equivalent of a point of presence where the partners send their data and then that service provider sends that data onto your company, you being the receiving partner. The key point there is the service provider, the value-added network service provider, is the organization that takes responsibility for the security of this data exchange. So the partners and your company sign on to say, okay, Mr. Service Provider, this is fantastic. We let you take control. We believe that when partner one sends information to us, we know that it's come from partner one because you have said that it's come from partner one. So that's a very key point. Sorry, go on.
One interesting point about this is that early on in BizTalk, they dropped a lot of the EDI stuff out of BizTalk in one of the releases. And what the reason was is they were looking at the value-added networks in the US, and their usage was dropping dramatically. But what they missed was the fact that people were going point to point.
Yeah.
So it was like all of a sudden they were scrambling to get the EDI stuff back into BizTalk because they completely missed the usage.
And I think that's an interesting segue, actually, right now, because you could argue that point-to-point model or the ability to not use a single service provider to send your data, which is great until that service provider no longer exists or they don't quite hit the SLAs. And then we start talking about something like AS2. So AS2 is point-to-point or via a provider in much the same way, but it's over HTTPS, right? So essentially, you create just a web connection and send your data over HTTPS. But of course, if you do it via a provider, that's fine. But if you don't do it via a provider, you have that issue of the fact, how do you prove or disprove that data came from the particular organization that should be sending you data? So in the AS2 world, that non-repudiation is via a certificate exchange. So essentially, me as an organization that is receiving data, say from Bill will create a certificate. He'll send me his public key. I'll send him my public key. We'll encrypt those messages in each direction, or he'll send a message to me. I'll send an acknowledgement back to him. That's what this NDN, I'll get to that in a second. That's what this NDN is. And essentially that says, okay, I've received your message. And not only have I received your message, but when you send that message in, I used your key to unpack it so I know that it came from you. So an MDM stands for Message Disposition Notification. And I think, Bill, you're going to be demoing that. Is that right?
Yes, I've got a demo of that. Perfect,
cool. So think about the evolution of that, and we've gone to AS2 specifically because from the perspective of Logic Apps, which obviously we talk about from how you solve these problems in Logic Apps, when you're presenting an HTTPS endpoint, you want to have this non-repudiation in place. AS2 is the kind of lingua franca that does a lot of this stuff. So that's the mechanism by which that's been built into the Logic Apps, by consumption and standard. So what do documents look like? Well, here's a couple of documents. So you can see that they are, in this particular case, they're separated by specific symbols. Those bits at the beginning of each one, like the ST, the BEG, the UNH, those mean specific things. And obviously the data after them also means specific things. So if you look at that purchase order on the left-hand side, you can see there's an address, there's a PO number, there's a date, and there's an item. If you look at the stuff on the right, where you see the EDI purchase order or the EDI or the Edifact EDI purchase order, at the bottom of that, you'll see that you can probably see that there's ways that you can join those two dots. XYZ company, 123 Main Street, or Streer, in fact, I've just noticed that. There you go. Then you can see where all that sort of stuff lines up on the sort of middle tier of that diagram. But one way of making sure that you don't overload things is to not just send these messages one at a time. So the bit on the right-hand side is how you then go, okay, well, you may have a purchase order. You create a purchase order group, so you send a group of purchase orders, and then that interchange. So the thing that wraps that is something that defines, who from and so on and so forth. So if you look at the blue bits in that middle tier, that's the interchange, and you can see the interchange envelope down the bottom there as an example. There's a group envelope that sits around that to define the number of messages that have a bunch of messages inside your interchange, and then obviously the individual messages. And the nice thing about when you see this stuff come through is you get the concept of good and bad messages that come through as part of that interchange. So what is Edifact? So Bill, it's Edifact that you're going to be displaying, right? So
yeah, I've got Edifact and AS2, and a combination of Edifact and AS2.
Perfect, right? So I've done a little bit of Edifact. Most of the stuff, as Bill mentioned earlier on with the customer that I was looking at, was X12. But yeah, you can read that for yourself. Electronic Data Interchange for administration, commerce, and transport. Edifact, fantastic. Very widely used in Europe. A couple of examples there. They just happen to be ones that I particularly used. So DES, ADV, dispatch advice, and handling and movement. So you can imagine that those particular messages, DES, ADV, and handmov, have a very specific format that defines what that message is. And the content of those messages is based on essentially a schema, and that schema defines how things on either side, like the EDI translators, handle that document and give you meaningful content back out the back of it. So X12 was developed was used extensively in the US, developed by ANSI, as you can see there. A couple of other examples there, an 869 and a 947. I actually find X12 a lot more readable just because of the way that it's structured. The example that you saw in the previous screen of those two messages, the top one was very X12ish because it was ANSI, and the bottom one was much more that Edifact. I think just the way that they look, it's a little bit easier to understand what they're doing. That's just personal choice. But they're the two main ones that I'm going to really call out, just purely because from the perspective of Logic Apps, they're the ones that are supported. And anybody who's got experience in BizTalk EDI will understand these two protocols pretty well. But what about in Azure? What happens when you translate this into Azure? So in Azure, and it depends on what parts of Azure you're using. So what I've done here is I've created three things, but the top one says integration account. But depending on if you're using consumption or if you're using Logic Apps standard, if you're using Logic Apps consumption, then schemas and maps actually also live in the integration account. If you're using Logic Apps standard, then you can actually have your schemas and maps separate to your integration account. So that's why I've broken them out like this. But essentially, the integration account has the idea of these partners. So that's me and the businesses that I'm interacting with. They have this concept of an agreement. An agreement basically says, okay, well, Bill, I'm going to exchange messages with you over AS2, and I'm going to use Edifact to do that. And the agreement defines what identifies me as an organization, whether I'm going to send MDN if I'm an X12, if I'm an AS2 user, and what kind of messages I'm going to be supporting as I send over that interchange. It's also where you store the certificates if you're doing it. So if you need to do things like MDNs and so on and so forth through AS2, you store your certificates inside the integration account. Schemas and maps are things that are very familiar to most people, I think. Obviously, from the background of a lot of this stuff, it's very XML based because the functionality of this has rolled in obviously via BizTalk. So schemas provide that concept of being able to do XML validation. They also have the ability to do flat files. So again, I don't think, Bill, you're not showing BizTalk at all?
No.
No. Okay. So just very briefly then, from a flat file perspective, for those people that don't know BizTalk, a flat file schema in BizTalk is something that converts XML into a flat file format. It's usually positional. It doesn't have to be positional. And essentially what that does is that transforms your inbound file, typically, like I say, XML, but it can be other things as well, into that format that you need to, say, drop into a file store or load into your warehouse management system. So the internal version, if you like, of that inbound message. And then maps to basically map between various file formats that you may or may not need. So aware that I'm pushing on, I want to give Bill plenty of time. So they're kind of the foundational parts of what makes an EDI interchange inside Azure. I've put flat file in there. It's not always necessary because obviously with Logic Apps, depending on what you're sending that file to or sending that data to, you may be able to just read that data directly out of the XML and place it into some backend system through a connector. But if you're refreshing an environment that's already there using, say, for instance, BizTalk, then the flat file schema is something that you can use to put your solution in place before you have to then remediate those other solutions. There are a bunch of other solutions. Oh, I forgot to mention Rosetta. Apologies. That's the other one that's supported by the integration account. Ones that aren't supported that you may or may not typically know of: HIPAA, as it says there, Health, ODET, which is a very popular one in Europe for around the automotive industry. And then the last two there are HL7 and Swift, both of which are actually supported BizTalk, but aren't, at least yet, I'm not aware of any plans for them to be, supported currently in an integration account. So if you do have workloads around those, then from an integration account perspective, you won't be able to use that. You'd have to use something else.
In Azure, if you want to do the HL7 side of things, there is the Fire server that will do a HL7 translation.
Correct. So I'll put gaps between the old and the new, and what this really is gaps between BizTalk, because that's an area that a lot of us on the call have come from, and Logic Apps. So the things that you get in BizTalk, which you might use around some of these things in terms of the processing, around business activity monitoring, that's not quite there. Business Rules Engine isn't there at all. And I mentioned HL7 and Swift. And then if you go between Logic Apps Consumption, which is the top one, and Logic Apps Standard, the AS2 version 2, I should have put AS2 there, but the AS2 version 2 preview connector is not available in Logic Apps Standard, which does simplify the way that you interact with the integration account, but that's not there at the moment. And the other thing, although I did hear that maybe this is coming pretty soon, is flat file processing. So the way to overcome that particular problem from a flat file processing perspective is, and I'll just go on to the next screen because I think I showed an example of it. Yes, cool, fantastic. So this is a typical interchange that you might do inside a Logic app. So you'll receive something over HTTPS. That'll have an AS2 message. So that'll be something that's an encrypted payload with a couple of headers. Those headers are used to resolve the agreement. So essentially those to and from headers are used to go back to the integration account and go, okay, well, I know this has come from Bill's company, and I know it's come to Martin's company. It's an AS2 interchange, so I'm going to use this particular agreement. Now, I've chosen X12 here because that's what I was using at the time. That then passes on to something called X12, or Edifact has its equivalent as well. So out of the back of the AS2 decoder, you'll get a bunch of text, which is the inbound message. What you need to do is you need to get some XML out of that. So that's what the X12 decoder will do. And what that does is that decodes it to a schema that you load into the integration account. And they're very, very standard schemas. And BizTalk has all these schemas as well. So if you do have BizTalk, you can grab them. But they're just very, very standardized schemas to provide a XML representation of that EDI message, whether that's X12 or Edifact. Now, the typical solution that I followed, because I was integrated into a backend solution warehouse management system that they didn't want to change, was to then transform that, create a flat file, and land that flat file in storage. But because flat file processing, at least currently, is not supported inside Logic App's standard, the way to solve that problem is to transform it and then call another Logic App, but that Logic App is actually a Logic App's consumption-based Logic App exposed as an HTTP endpoint. Because if you do that, you can shut that. Go.
Did you try the liquid maps?
I did, but well, actually, no, I didn't. But so that's an interesting call out. Actually, yeah, I've not tried that. Have you tried it, Bill?
Yeah, because liquid will go JSON to JSON, JSON to XML, JSON to text, or XML to JSON and XML to text.
Yeah, the only question mark I have there is the complexity of the XML message, the inbound XML message, because the EDI messages are very, very complex, right? So
yeah, I've mapped them to JSON in the sample I've got.
Fantastic, great. So that's a good example, right? But the way that I solved that without the flat file processing, because I had all the flat file schemas basically, so from the customer, was to call out to just another HTTP endpoint essentially. Now you can do that through an actual function if you wanted to, and that's what a lot of the online forums say to use. But then you don't get the advantage of using the fact that you've got all these schemas already stored in your integration account. So it's a lot easier to just do that flat file processing directly in an external Logic App that's a consumption Logic App. Now, in my case, I then chucked that into storage, and I had an event grid message send off to something else, which did the in-house processing. And at the end of all of this, you get your response, and you get your MDM say, yes, you are who you said you are, right? Which is what's really the outcome of this is that I've received your message, I've decoded it, I've stored it, and I'm happy that you sent that message. And with that, I said I'd take about 20 minutes, and I think I've taken about 20 minutes, so that's good. So Bill, I think, look, let's look at how it's done.
Okay, perfect. So let me add my screen to it. So basically for everyone, just to give you a level set on what I've done is I have EDI Demo Partner 1, EDI Demo Partner 2, 2 different resource groups and 2 different subscriptions. I'm just being cheap because I wanted to do a free integration account because you get 1 per subscription. So what I've done is I have the solutions built EDI, all the EDI pieces in and out in Logic Apps. I've got API management fronting all of the Logic Apps, so none of the Logic Apps are directly exposed to the internet. I have app configuration for some of my configuration. I've got Key Vault, and I have my log analytics workspace. A little bit quickly, I'll show you what the solution looks like in here. So what I've got is I've got an EDI solution. I got Partner 1 and Partner 2, and basically the solutions look pretty much the same. I've got some API management policies I'm using. I've got some PowerShell I'm using to deploy the API management policies, and also for my partner configuration inside of the integration account, I basically have a setup to where I am putting in my Azure, the ARM template, I am defining my partner. So there's my partner. There is my EDIFACT agreement. And then I also have an AS2 agreement. And to make it easier, I just did Partner 1 and Partner 2. Much easier to keep track of the naming conventions and things like that. And then all of this is deployed with the ARM templates and some PowerShell. Now, what I did is this is part of a project that I was working on with a client, and I've got my order coming, invoice coming in and an order coming in, and then I'm sending out basically an order, which is a PO. Now, what I did is I've got this bit of configuration here that tells me that if I tell it it's Partner 2 AS2, it goes out as AS2. If I tell it it's Partner 2 EDIFACT, it goes out EDIFACT, and then I've got another one that sends it out EDIFACT and then AS2. So so that's a little bit of the setup. What I'm planning to do is I got a little bit more cleanup to do on this, and then I'm going to actually put this whole solution out on my GitHub repo. So let's go back here to the actual resource group. Let's go into the partner one. And so what I've got, yes.
While you're at that, can you just zoom in a little bit? It feels like a small for the people that in the audience. Yeah, 125 should be great, or 120. Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, so what I've got is got my API management, and we'll have a quick look at that. What I've got is I've got APIs EDI demo in. So that's for inbound documents coming into partner one. So AS2 and EDIFACT, AS2 MDN. So you can do an asynchronous MDN, and then EDIFACT, and then the out. It goes out through the PO out, and then it reads that configuration and then goes out AS2, EDIFACT, or EDIFACT and AS2. So if we go back now to here, so if we look at what it looks like to come in EDIFACT, let's go quickly and look at this Logic App. And what we have is it's HTTP request coming in. Then it goes into, as Martin was saying, the EDIFACT decoder. And you'll notice that there's no configuration in that decoder for the trading partners. That all is taken out of the message. And then I'm just initializing some variables. I check to see if if I've got any bad messages. And then I loop through my good messages. And then I also check to see if I want to send with EDIFACT, I can have a technical act that says I was able to read it. And then I have a functional act that says I was able to process it. So I've got checks in there of, do I need to send a technical act or a functional act? Now, if you got both, it's a little bit harder because the technical act will go back in the response, and the functional act needs to go asynchronous back to them through another endpoint. The AS2 in is a little bit simpler because basically what we've got with it is that I bring it in and it comes in, and I use the headers and the body to decode it. And this is what that preview one that Martin was talking about makes it a little bit easier. And then I check to see whether I'm expected to send back a MDN. If I am, then I need to check whether it's going sync or async. And then basically the sync goes back into the reply stream. Otherwise, you reply just with the 200, and then you send the MDM back synchronous. So, and then when we have the EDIFACT AS2 one, we basically go in here and we decode it with AS2, and then we feed the output of that AS2 decode into the EDIFACT decode. Now, we'll quickly look at I just don't want to spend too much time, but we'll quickly look. So if I'm sending out a PO with EDIFACT, and so I basically get my request in, and I go look up some configuration based on the trading partner that I've sent in the request. I look up the map, I apply a map, and then I use the EDIFACT encoder. And the encoder does take a bit more information. So the encoder actually takes the agreement plus the contents. And then basically I take that and it gives me the content and the headers that I need to send with it. And then I've looked the rest of this up through my configuration. And if we go to the, we'll just go to the AS2 one on the way out. it's a little bit simpler. I'm going in there. Right now, I'm doing the same transform, but I could be sending the JSON. I could be sending anything. That is the one advantage of AS2 is it doesn't care what the payload looks like. So we can do that. And then there's the encode. And then you basically get the you get the encoded headers and you get the encoded message content. And then the last one would be out of when you send it out to Edifact and then AS2. So you just stack those in there. Again, this is using my configuration in here. So basically from partner to partner, the map to apply, things like that. So let's go in and look. What I've got is I've got a, if you're familiar with the REST plugin for Visual Studio Code. So what I've got here is I'm going to my API endpoint for my demo out for a PO. I'm using the trading partner partner to Edifact, so it'll look up that particular configuration for the Edifact. And this is a PO document basically set up to a purchase order. So if I see how the demo gods are feeling tonight. And this takes a little while to warm up the first time. Because this is actually going through 2 Logic apps on the way out and then a Logic app on the way in on the other side. So let's see how we're going here. And we'll actually have a look at the output. So in this one, I also had it set up for a technical act, and that's the Edifact encoded technical act coming back. So now if we go over here and we look at our partner 1, it came in through the PO out. So we should see a run that's happened right now. That's the right time. So what happens is I receive that, and there's my message coming in. I've got a header that tells me that which trading partner to use. I'm going to find that in there. I know that it's in there somewhere. Trading partner. There it is, Edifact. And what this one does is it basically goes out, and looks up configuration in Key Vault, and basically finds out what transport to use. And the way I've named this is then it basically parses the config and then takes the information, and PO Edifact makes this up to the other Logic app it needs to call, and then it passes that same document off to that. And then so we'll go here and go back to the PO Edifact. A little bit of this does actually, it is a little bit redundant because it does the same type of thing. It looks up the trading partner again. This time it also looks up what map to apply. So it applies this PO JSON to PO XML. And basically we come out with the XML equivalent of our purchase order. And then that goes into the Edifact encoder and basically comes out and looks, the output basically gives you a base 64 encoded. And I should have done this earlier, and just let me do a base 64 decoder. See if that one, okay. Okay, so basically what we got here, let me just paste this into Visual Studio Code, I think, file, new file. And I think I've got a Edifact add-on for Visual Studio Code, so I can format the document. So that should look very similar to what Martin showed you as one of the samples. So basically, it's got trading partner to and from, and there's the purchase order lines and things like that in there. So that basically gives you that. So that's gone into through the encoder. So it basically gives you some extra information about that. And then we take that, and then that goes into the send to trading partner. And then we get back from a response back from that with the MDN in it. Now let me go back here real quick and go to partner 2. And let's look at the partner 2 EDIFACT in. And we'll have one at the same time at 7:32. Yep. So basically here, it's come in through the HTTP request, and then it's gone back down to the EDIFACT decoder. And what we'll see is if we look at the decoder, what we see is, like Martin said before, we've got a array of good messages. Any of those messages in there that failed would be in the bad messages array. And also what it is, because when it came in, one of the parameters I had set in the agreement was that it needs a technical act. Okay, so the decoder actually creates that technical act for you. So there's no work you have to do that. You basically just need to check to see if it's required. So then what I do is I set a bunch of variables. I check if it's anything failed, and then I go through the good messages, and the acts are associated with those. So I check to see if there's an act required. There is. Then I go over here and look and say, okay, I'm creating my technical act, and then basically, then down here I check to see, I get my technical act, and then I respond to the stream with that technical act, and it comes back all the way to my sender. So back through the 2 logic apps that send it on the way out and back through. So that basically is all, and that's all based on the agreement. Let's go have a quick look at that. So if we go back to our portal, go into here, go back into partner 1, go to our integration account, and you'll see our partner 1 and partner 2. And basically partner 1, it's not a whole lot of information. Actually, no, let's do it over here. There's our partner, and we can edit in JSON. JSON gives you a little bit better look at it. So it's a B2B partner. It's got some different identifiers. So each partner can have multiple identifiers. And we've got an AS2 identity in here. And then basically there's some more contact information. But that's all really the partner has to do. There's not a whole lot. Both of them are just got different numbers, and partner 1 and partner 2. Then everything else is controlled by the agreements. So I have a partner 1 to partner 2 EDIFACT, which is what we just did. And then basically you see that the host partner is partner 1, the guest partner is partner 2, and then the host identity is that, guest identity is that, the agreement type is EDIFACT. You set all your protocol settings here, like character sets and things like that. Then envelope settings of the multiple messages in a transaction if you want to. Then you set the acknowledgement. And so basically I've got that set in there. And then the different types, because this is the receive agreement. So this is if partner 2 is sending a message to partner 1, it comes into this set of settings. For partner 1 sending to partner 2, this is the send agreement. And this is the one that we used, because you'll notice down here we have a need technical acknowledgement marked in there. And we basically have the schemas that we're going to send. So I'm sending out the order schema, those schemas are deployed into our integration account along with those maps that we looked at. So there's their PO JSON to PO XML. And then we also have a AS2 agreement. And again, we'll look at that in just a minute. So that's the partner 1 to partner 2. Let's do just the straight. Let's go in here now and go down here to my next one, which is a partner 2 AS2. And we'll do let's clear this out, and we'll do a send request. Any questions? I don't see any. If you can post comments into the live stream if there's questions. So that's run. And if we'll go out here now and look, we'll see that partner 1 and the Logic App PO AS2 ran there. And basically, I went ahead and transformed it. So what happened is the AS2 encoder took in an XML file and output the contents, and it gives you all of the information about. So you'll see there, message is encrypted. The message is signed. So that's the way you guarantee both sides of the receiver sender. So basically is that I have encrypted it with mine and signed it with theirs. So you have to have both of the certificates. And I've requested a synchronous MDN. So let's look at this now. If we go down here, I've sent to the trading partner, and you'll see that check if MDN is expected. It is. Then basically there is the AS2 decoder. That's what came in as a response from the send, which is the MDN. And then basically it did the same decoding here. It's the sender was partner 2 this time, partner 1. The MDN's not encrypted. It is signed. The MDN processing status is succeeded. So it succeeded on the other end. So that's basically all of the details about that on the partner 1 side. If we go here to partner 2 now, and we can see the AS2 in 7:41, same time, and we'll see that the message came in, content and content type, and then it went into the AS2 decoder and came out as my XML message. And we got all the details here. It's from partner 1 to partner 2. The message is encrypted, the message signed, and then basically go through that. And it automatically generates if we show the raw output, it automatically generates the outgoing MDN content and the outgoing MDM headers. So all you have to do in that case is you just go in here and you check to see if they're expecting an MDM back. If they are, then you check to see whether it is a synchronous MDN. If it is, you just put it into the response headers and body. If it's not, you send a 200 back, and then you do an HTTP request. It didn't actually go that way that time, but basically that's the way you can do a synchronous. So one thing I will cover is that getting the certificate set up in here is a little bit painful. What you have to do is it's a couple of step process, and I've got some documentation that I'm working on in here. So basically what you have to, let me get back to a normal screen size. So what you have to do is there's a bit of PowerShell I've got here, that basically, let's do view word wrap. So basically, I create a new self-signed certificate with a exportable, and it's just partner1 biztalkbuild.com, and it goes into my local machine certificate store. Then what you need to do is you need to go in here and you export it twice. You export it with a private key to a partner1.pfx. Then you export it without the private key as a partner1 CER. And then you need to go into Key Vault. And this is a little bit strange, I know, when I said Key Vault just then. Normally you would expect just the integration account, but what we do is we go into Key Vault. Let me just find where my Key Vault is. Come on, Key Vault, here you go. Key Vault. And then what you do is go in here to keys and you generate import, and you import, you select your PFX file and you type in the password and you give it a name. I can't do that because I've already got one out there, but that, and then you create. So what that does is it extracts the private key out of that PFX based on the password and everything. And then now you've got a key in your Key Vault. Then you go back to your integration account and you go into certificates and you add a certificate, and I'm going to 1A. Certificate type is a private certificate. You select, and now this sounds funny, you select the CER file. Then you select the key from Key Vault. So that basically brings the certificate in with its private key so that you can use it to do encryption. But then what you will do is you would give that CER file, so that CER file that we created as part of that, you would give that to your trading partner. And what they would do is they'll go in here, not that one, they'll go in here, let's go over to this one, go back to partner 2, go to the integration account, they would go to certificates and they would add, and this time I'll do partner 1A, and they would pick public certificate, and then they would browse to the partner 1 CER file that you've sent them, and that's all they need to do, because that CER file has got your public key. So the way the encryption works is basically I encrypt the data with my private key and they decrypt the data with my public key. So that you need to do that on both ends. So you'll see in both of these cases on the partner 1 side. So I have a private key for partner 1, which is mine, has a private key. And then I have a public certificate, which doesn't have a private key, just has the public key for partner 2. And then on the other side, I have a public certificate for partner 1 and a private certificate for partner 2. And then if we go back here and look at the agreement for AS2, and we'll edit the JSON because it's a little bit easier to do, what you'll see is partner 1, host, guest, same as what we saw before, AS2. And then basically what we'll see is the signing certificate is partner 2. So I'm using the partner 2's public key to sign the message. And then I'm using the partner 1's private key to encrypt the message. And that's basically on the receive side. And the same, similar on the send. So it's signed with the partner 1, and then it's encrypted with partner 2. Because partner 2, they've got their private key, I've got their public key, so I can decrypt it. So that's basically that. Now, with the asynchronous MDN, what you can do is you can put inside of the agreement, you can put the URL you want them to go to. And basically, I use the feature of API management to add the subscription key as part of the URL. So let's go in here. I haven't tested this, so we might have a little fun with this. So we're going to, on the send agreement, let's go in here and say we want to send the MDM async. And let's go say okay to that. Let's go back to here and go back to our test AS2 and do a send request. And this is a totally untested demo, but why not?
Love it, Bill. I love the seat of the pants.
Okay, so now what we've seen there, it got a 200, so it worked. So we'll see now if we go to our where we're sending our so PO AS2. We've got the one at 751. It went out, and what we'll do is you'll see that MDM expected is false. Okay, instead of true like it was before. And then what we should see now is that if we go to our MDN in, which is the URL we gave it, aha, we have a asynchronous MDN came in. And you'll see it's partner 2 to partner 1. It's message processing succeeded. So that's the asynchronous MDN. And if we go look at
Bill, loving your work.
and if we go in here and look at the AS2 receiver here, what we'll see is that when that ran, what it did is it came and said there is an MDM expected, but then it went down here and checked and says, no, it's not synchronous, it's asynchronous. So what we did is we went over here, responded back with just a 200, but then we sent the NDM back to that address that was in the header. So just to show you where that came from, let's go back to the top. Oh, I didn't mean to. Let's go plus. Let's go look at the header that came in, and we'll see that the receipt delivery option is set to what we put in that agreement. So basically, I just read the header, receive delivery option header, and that's where I sent that back to. And to use API management, because we don't have a way to specify the other header for the subscription key, you need to add it as a query parameter if you want to have this.
I think it's worth pointing out, Bill, of course, that the asynchronous, the idea of an asynchronous MDN doesn't have to happen as part of that process, right? It can happen at any time after the receiving parties actually process the message. So yeah, that's the power of it, right? But showing that just there just shows how easy it is that you can then say have that go to a queue and process it somewhere else as part of your processing. It doesn't have to be as part of that Logic App.
Yep. So, and what I've done in the examples that I've done is that in between the AS2 decode and the check MDM, this is where I send it to a API that the customer had set up that wanted to receive it. So if it worked, I knew it was either success or fail at that point. So I just pulled that out because I didn't want to complicate the demo with going off a separate API and things like that. And I mean, the last one, and we don't have a whole lot of time, but the last one example I've got is basically that same thing for EDIFACT and AS2. So it's really just taking the combination of those two and sending them. So, and let's see, send request. And now this should use that same AS2 agreement that I had. So I should get a second. This one gave me the technical ACK back from the EDIFACT, but I should also have in the partner 1 MDN in, I should have no, I must not have that set up in that. Yeah, I know I was working on one of those. I just have, at the moment, I had just the EDIFACT technical ACK and functional ACK. I hadn't added the other one because it gets a little complicated, because if you send the AS2 back as synchronous, that means you have to send the technical ACK and the functional ACK both as asynchronous. Or if you send the AS2 back as asynchronous, then you can send the technical ACK back synchronous and the other one. So there's a little bit of argy-bargy that has to go on about how you want to do that in there. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that AS2 is there to be used. It does not mean anything. You don't have to use EDIFACT. You don't have to use X12. You can just use it for a transport layer that allows you to get a notification that they have processed the message. You almost get, I mean, AS2 AS2 was designed about the same time as some of the HTTP and SOAP stuff. So you get a similar thing back with HTTP, and it's just that your encryption options are more. You can sign it, you can encrypt it, and this is all inside of HTTPS. Originally, all of this stuff was actually going across HTTP. That's why the payloads were encrypted and signed, was because they were using, a lot of times they were using HTTP. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in the demo. And again, a lot of this demo was built out of sheer, I wanted to be able to test this without getting anybody else involved.
Good plan.
Yep. So that way I was able to, and I mean, the big thing that I was having when I first started to work on this is being able to look at what it looks like when AS2 comes into my Logic app. What does it look like in terms of what's coming in on the HTTP? So it's these AS2 headers. That was the big thing I was looking for. And also, how do I handle the content and things like that there? And then also, once I did the decode, because the decoder gives you so much information. So this is all the stuff that comes out of the decode. Normally, you would expect just the body to come out, but you've got all this other stuff. You've got the headers. You've got all of the details about the message, the MDN if it's been requested. So if you don't request an MDN in the agreement, it won't generate those. But basically, then you got to make sure that you pick up the headers and the content, because you can't send just the content. You got to send the content of and the headers. Otherwise, it doesn't work because it doesn't know the from and the to. So just watch my Twitter, because I will be putting all this solution out on my GitHub repo so that people can basically do it. All I've done is I've got it at the moment. I've got the pipeline using YAML. So if we look just quickly here, I've got a YAML file for. I hate the way that splits sometimes. Let's go. I got a YAML file for the build, but for the one I'm going to put out on GitHub, I'm actually going to have the YAML for the build and the release. Currently, in this example, I'm using the release pipelines in a DevOps to do the release. So let's see. Okay, we got a question out there. If Logic App standard is inside of a virtual network and the integration account is not, how can we handle that? Any thoughts on that? Okay, so how are you, I guess my first question is, how are you putting the Logic App standard inside of the virtual network? Because from what I understand, the standard runs in that workflow service that has the ability to communicate with the VNet, but it doesn't actually live in the VNet. Is that right, Martin?
Yeah, correct. I mean, so if for inbound traffic, you use a private endpoint, and for outbound traffic, you use VNet integration. Yeah.
Well, but you can, but you can
injecting it into the network. Yeah.
Yeah, you can actually do both, because I did a test a while ago where you use private link and you set it to where your inbound traffic and your outbound traffic goes through the VNet, and then you use the NAT gateway on your VNet so that you've got a single outbound IP address. So that would be the way it would go to get to your the consumption-based Logic Apps that it connectors that it needs for the AS2 and things like that, because they're not running in the standard. That would also be the way it would get to the integration account.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So the integration account, I'm not sure what the answer is there, but unless Wagner, you know, if you're still on. But in terms of Logic App standard, that can live inside of VNet, right? That's what private link or private endpoints and VNet integration is for. It runs on the functions runtime, so it runs in that same way.
One thing that we needed to take in consideration when you're talking about Logic Apps standard and VNet integration is that's only going to be applicable for built-in connectors.
Yes, very true. Yeah.
So there's the same kind of discussion that I have with a whole lot of clients, because they think that everything is going to work with VNet integration, especially if you turn on VNet root all, but the managed connectors are still Azure bound. So you would have to go up to Azure and then call the APIs from there. So that means that they're probably hitting the public endpoints. But if it is a built-in connector, then yes, they would be able to integrate with VNet.
Yeah. So yeah, but the thing is, for the AS2 and the EDIFACT, those are still Azure connectors. They're not actually in the built-in connectors. So you would go from your Logic App connected to your VNet, and if you had all the outbound traffic routed through the VNet, it would go out through like a NAT gateway to your Azure-based connectors and also to your integration account, the way I understand it.
Also, I just saw that notice, Sujit, so the phrasing here. One thing that we needed to understand is that the Logic Apps is not inside a virtual network; is integrated with virtual network, right?
Yeah,
that integration means that it's still PaaS, it's still on public cloud, and has access through the VNet integration to virtual network.
Yeah, so that's
the thing. The only way you get Logic Apps inside a virtual network is to not use Logic Apps standard, but to use Logic Apps consumption in the ISE.
Well, but no, you could actually you can use Logic App standard in a container.
Yes, that's
or on a VM, a container inside a VM, or in a container.
Yeah, or Kubernetes. I guess.
Yeah.
But it's still. Yep. So he just come back on that. Yep. So because I mean that's a good point, because that's where and that's where with the Logic App standard at the moment, it's still going to be using those Azure connectors for those kind of internet-based things. So like if you go to any of the OneDrive, the Outlook, or the Office 365, any of that kind of stuff, it's already in the internet. That's not going to be in those built-in connectors. That's going to have to go out through the internet to get there.
It's a very good question, though, and I think probably in a future session, it's probably worth hooking up a conversation around Azure Arc and Logic Apps and functions.
Yeah, I agree. I think Beck did a little bit of that in a previous session, but we should be doing a little bit more of that. And Sujit, if it's you online, that was actually an awesome question, because is a common misunderstanding that a lot of people have.
Yeah, it is. Bill, could you just quickly pop back to my screen?
Yep.
Just very quickly. We do have 11 Azure passes, right? So we've tried to figure out how this would work, and bearing in mind that this is being recorded, so we don't want to expose anybody's details. So we think that we've got 11 Azure passes. They're worth $100, valid until the end of November. That's coming from the Azure development team in Microsoft. So that's thanks to them for providing those. So if you go on Twitter, hopefully you've got a Twitter account, mention this presentation, tag @integration_du, because that's the tag for the group, and put #Logic Apps EDI rocks, some form of that. Then we'll find that and we'll reach out to you over Twitter and get some information to send you an Azure pass.
Yep. So that'll be good. So
and that means that Martin is going to be like sitting now creating a Logic Apps with Twitter to find out the first 11 to do that.
I'll be refreshing Twitter every 3 seconds.
But yeah, so I think that again, also you can reach out on that integration down under to if you have questions about any of this stuff, because again, I know when I first started playing with it, there was bits and pieces scattered everywhere, but there wasn't a centralized kind of demo that you could put that had everything in it. And that was kind of the reason I created the demos that I created, so that I could do it kind of from inside of one environment, so that I could test without having to get somebody else involved and things like that, and worry about certificates and all that kind of stuff.
As a resident Microsoft person on the call, I think it's fair to say that whereas the documentation around Logic Apps is generally not that bad, the documentation around Logic Apps EDI is not anywhere near as full featured. It's very much. I think a lot of it is determined on the fact that you probably know what you're talking about from the days of BizTalk, So if you don't have that knowledge, it's maybe not so comfortable. So some great demo there, I think.
Yep. So and again, it's one of those things as people as I run across these things, I try to put the demos together as good as I can, and then we'll get those up on. I'm got a public GitHub endpoint. We'll put some of that stuff on and link to from there. But again, I mean, for me, it was trying to do a project for a customer, so I needed to test some stuff, but also just trying. But just also trying to be able to build a self-contained test environment so that I could see how it works, see how the different options work, because a lot of times the customer only had one option on there. So I wanted to see that asynchronous and synchronous, the different technical acts and stuff like that, and how they worked. It's all of that stuff trying to come together in one piece.
Yeah, and I think the customer that I was working with had a very specific use case, which was the only thing I could solve in terms of the time that I had. So I think that sort of generalized set of demos you got there, Bill, was great. Yep.
And I didn't show any of the liquid maps, but basically the liquid maps for those EDI XML files are ugly.
The XML files are very complex.
Any kind of mapping for EDI is going to be ugly, right?
Yep.
So XST, liquid, whatever it is going to be ugly.
Yeah. But it's surprising that the guys I've been working with that had no experience with liquid or really even EDI XML have picked it up pretty quick and been able to make changes and things like that they needed to make to it. At first they were making them in the integration account, which wasn't great, but then they got to the point where they were making them in the source control so that we could push them in and things like that. We got the project up and going a lot quicker than we expected. So
once you've done one, you've done some more, which is really good, I think. So
so if there's any other questions, we did get a comment back from Chris Watson on a very interesting presentation. Thanks,
Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
And so I don't think there's
no more questions.
We're about 10 minutes over anyway, but that's all right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast. And thanks everyone for attending, and see you next month.
Thanks all.
everyone.